welcome to the film cast review of May December. This movie is streaming right now on Netflix. Netflix? Did I say Netflix?
Netflix.
I'm going to read the plot summary on the internet. 20 years after their notorious tabloid romance, a married couple buckle under pressure when a Hollywood actress beats them to do research for a film about their past. All right, Todd Haynes, we've talked about him on the podcast. Really interesting filmmaker, makes some really interesting choices. May December, possibly one of his most successful, widely seen movies yet. Jeff Kanata, I'm really curious. You know, you are an actor. You've studied acting, and this movie has so many layers. There is the whole component of older woman getting together with younger student child, and then on top of that,
we call that the icky part.
And on top of that, the additional layer of there's an actor who's trying to come in and represent one of the characters in that story, and on top of that, there is the fact that this is a Hollywood film, and therefore Julianne Moore, who plays the woman, has already gone through that process that is being gone through by Natalie Portman's character in this movie. So a lot of layers to this thing. We're eager to dive into it, but let's start with overall thoughts. Jeff Kanata, what did you think of May December?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say my thoughts on May December are best summed up in the form of a limerick.
Okay, let's hear it.
I wasn't privy to the scuttlebutt of this story, which granted is nuts. The acting is good, but I don't know what I should come away thinking other than, what?
Wow. Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right.
We talked earlier about wavelength, and I feel like this is another movie where I just wasn't on its wavelength. I wanted to. I really love Julianne Moore. I really love Natalie Portman, and I think their performances are engaging and interesting. I am not a tabloid guy. I had no idea that this was even referencing something real until Devindra sent us a video.
Jeff, you lived through the 90s as an adult.
But I tried not to pay attention to any of that.
What?
I did my best to avoid.
I heard about this, but okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So Jeff is alluding to the fact that this is based rather heavily, I will discuss further on later on this podcast, on the real life story of Mary Kay Letourneau, who had a relationship and then got married to one of her students.
After you sent that video, I was like, vague recollection of something like that, but I just don't. I don't try to hang on to that stuff. Anyway, I didn't really pay attention, so I didn't even access the movie on that level, which I think is kind of intended. I think you're supposed to approach this movie with a sort of a background of knowledge that I just didn't access.
You're supposed to be able to watch it with a clean slate and still get something out of it for sure.
Well, I don't know. There's interesting texture there. There's stuff going on, and like you said, there's sort of a layer of how does one capture a performance? How does one try to portray a real person? But I don't think the movie is really interested in that. I think the movie is kind of poking holes in that entire endeavor in a way. And honestly, as this movie starts, it feels to me more like a detective story where the detective is an actor instead of a detective. I thought, man, what a cool idea for a detective story. Like, you're an actor and you're going in to portray this real person, then you find all this juicy stuff, which is not really where the movie ends up, because I feel like it kind of falls off the rails for me in the third act. And by the end, which we will talk about more specifically, I just came away going like, what am I even supposed to have gotten from that? Which, again, recurring theme this week, but maybe Jeff, it's just my failure as a intellectual person.
No, you can only have your honest reactions. I will say that I remember Jeff being not heartbroken, but like very crestfallen when I reported my reaction to seeing Avatar: The Way of Water.
Yes.
You're like, oh, I'm so sad that Dave Chen couldn't have the experience Jeff Kanata, had.
Yes.
Yes.
This is my Avatar: The Way of Water for you, Jeff. I'm like,
indeed.
I was watching this. I was like, Jeff is gonna freaking
This is
love
Jeff
this.
Kanata catnip.
I was like,
he's gonna eat this up.
This is so in Jeff's wheel. This is gonna be. He's gonna love this so much.
Two people in a room talking to each other
and
dramatically.
I am sad that you didn't have, the experience I had watching this.
I felt like it didn't add up to anything for me. And I'm sure you guys will disagree vehemently, but I was sort of interested along the way. I mean, it is kind of icky and you're kind of feel like, what? And again, I was not accessing it from this was real. It was, it felt, perhaps it would have landed differently on me in that case. I watched it with my wife because Devindra was very
I was sure Jeff Kanata was going to love this movie. Like that was my all in.
I would have bet money on Jeff Kanata liking this movie. For sure. Yeah.
That's wild to me.
Yeah.
That's wild.
What did your wife think, Jeff?
She fell asleep. She also she woke back up, and we spent many minutes trying to unravel what the hell the ending was supposed to be telling us. Which we'll talk about. But yeah, neither of us thought it was compelling viewing. And I felt like this subject matter was beneath everyone involved is what I felt.
Okay.
And it just felt like trashy, kind of like, what are we trying to say? And I'm sure you guys will illuminate me, but I'm frustrated that repeatedly this episode, I feel like the Luddite who just is not smart enough to get those fancy art movies, which is not usually how I feel. But
I hope we're not trying. I'm not trying to communicate.
Oh, I'm sure you will as you begin.
I'm not trying to like make you feel bad in any way for not getting. I think we disagree. On the movie. Yeah,
I don't understand why people like this movie. I don't understand why people like Zone of Interest. But where
I'll agree with you is I do think the movie is a mishmash of tones, including camp. It's definitely right from the beginning. It sets your expectations. There's a very notable scene in like the first 5 minutes where this dramatic music plays, and then Julianne Moore says, "I don't think we're gonna have enough hot dogs."
Cut
to the guys grilling like 30 hot dogs, and so it's like there's this whole. It's a very like that's what this.
This movie starts, I would say, by signifying its tone, very similar to Zone of Interest actually, because it's like. It's close up on butterflies and cocoons and caterpillars, but also the score is this like relentless thing. It's like it is kind of like a mystery thriller score that is really in your face. That feels so weird for a movie like this. So it kind of thrusts you into that.
But you're right. It is playing a you're about to see a murder type score under somebody preparing lunch.
Exactly. So I think it's very conscious of the tones it's playing with. Now, whether it worked for you, whole different question, but
it did not.
It's not. it's certainly playing in a bunch of different modes at the same time. Devindra, let's hear from you. May, December, your overall thoughts on the movie.
I talked about this briefly before, but since the first time I talked about this movie, I rewatched it again with my wife. I rewatched parts of it with my parents because they are into fun melodramas like this too. And I have to say, every time I see this movie, I just get more out of it. I think this is Jeff, you're asking like, what do you get out of this movie, right? It's like, what don't I get out of this movie? Like it is an exploration of our fascination with tabloid dramas. Like I was aware the story existed. I wasn't like a student of it or anything, but I do remember as a kid thinking, that's weird. That's weird that would happen. And then we would eventually hear more and more about the couple over the time. I believe Mary Kay Letourneau passed away recently. But we would hear like they had kids, they raised a family together. I think they separated towards the end. But I would just hear these things like, I wonder how that relationship works. I wonder how that kind of fits in together. And this movie is such a fascinating exploration of that. Like an exploration of like, okay, what would this relationship be like 30 years down the line? Also, what would it be like for a person who essentially, who was a child? This is a movie about child rape. and the word rape is never said once within it. And I think that itself is kind of interesting too, because people are fascinated. What people have always been fascinated in the story, but it's rare. Like, people are fascinated, but they also don't necessarily think of the rape word very often, because they're like, oh, he's a teenage boy and he was really into it, and maybe he really wanted to do this. It's child rape because of the age, because he had no, like, he could not really consent to this whole thing. But the movie is about like how we are more fascinated in the story and the why would somebody do this. It's fascinating that Natalie Portman's character is an actor, because she's not a journalist, right? Which I think a lot of these stories would be about a journalist or a detective trying to figure out the
Mhm.
story.
Yeah.
She's not trying to find the truth. She's trying to find a truth
A truth.
that
Yeah, I
she
was
can
gonna say a
perform
truth. Yeah.
that she can perform and kind of embody it, but also use it as a part of her art, right? It's not about judging this other character for what she did. It's about being fascinated by them and wanting to embody them, and also use it to, like, basically, I don't know, keep the commerce going. But it's also, yeah,
I just want to push back on that slightly, because I feel like, and we'll get to this in spoilers, but I feel like the ending undermines what you just said.
I
I
think it
feel
totally sells it. But yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, let's talk about it. Yeah.
I think
Anyway.
that is probably part of the thing that at least unlocked the ending for me. But also, like, that final scene, we will discuss it. I don't think it makes or breaks the movie, but what is interesting is also this exploration of a domestic relationship where it was really uneven at the beginning. It was a big tabloid scandal. How does this child grow up to be an adult? Did they ever really have a childhood? I think Charles Melton is a freaking revelation in this movie. Like, I have seen him before on Riverdale and a couple other things, and he was on Riverdale. He's just like he's a bad guy jock, right? He's a really pretty face. For this movie, I think he put on like 30 or 40 pounds to get the real suburban dad look. And I have to say, yes, can confirm that's exactly what happens when you move to the suburbs. It is very, this movie starts with him just trying to, like, be like, well, I'm a dad, I guess. I guess I have to light this grill. I got to do this thing. It's about a guy who feels like he's trapped in this role in his life, and he's just like trying. He doesn't know who he is. So his own portrayal, I think, is so fascinating, and we'll talk about like what happens to him down the line. But there's just so many interesting elements in this movie. Like, it is a mystery box. It is so twisty. It often implicates the audience too for what we expect we're going to see in it, but also then kind of makes you feel bad about it, because like that is what we want as a society. Like, so many people want the tabloid story. I got so much out of this movie because I don't know. I think it's incredibly well acted. It's wonderfully well written. The motivations are intriguing. And it's kind of getting at a lot too. Like, we'll discuss it too. Like, there are racial implications here too, because this was about a white woman in her 30s basically preying on a 13-year-old Asian kid in her neighborhood. And now she has a mixed race family. And also, there's like a lot of weird power dynamics within that this movie also touches on, that I think is kind of fascinating too. There is so much. Like, this is a movie where I feel like there's no fat to it. Every scene I have seen in this movie, I just feel like it's just so compelling to me. This is one of those movies where I'm going to just be thinking about it for a while. I think, like, it has really stuck itself in me.
I'll share a couple brief thoughts, and then let's do spoilers for May, December. I'm kind of on the same page as Devindra on this one. I think the acting is really incredible. The three main leads, I think, all
Mhm.
do a tremendous job. The primary pleasure of the movie, I think, Jeff, is what you described. Is in some ways a mystery, but
Mhm.
not even necessarily in just what Natalie Portman is uncovering. It's kind of also uh, you see a picture of this family at the beginning of the film, and then as the movie goes on, it becomes more and more complicated, right? That's kind of what
Mhm.
the emotional journey of the movie was for me. And then on a parallel track, there's Natalie Portman's character, and you have a kind of idea of who she is, and then as the movie goes on, that becomes more and more complicated as well. And that's what I thought was really interesting about the movie, like
Mhm.
very character based. Hey, we think we know these people, we don't actually know them, and we keep getting surprised by what we learn as time goes on.
And everyone
Um,
is interesting. The lawyer is so interesting. The other
yeah,
family is a whole other pile of drama. Like, oh man.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think the moment that really sold me on the film, like that, I was like, I'm on board, was when Natalie Portman's character interviews Julianne Moore's character's ex-husband, and they're in this coffee shop, and she interviews him, and he just gives this incredibly naturalistic performance that's basically what someone in this situation would probably feel like.
Yeah.
There's no there's no screaming and getting up and throwing things. It's just like, hey, this is a thing that happened to me.
I'm just a dad.
I'm just a dad, and this is a thing that happened. I think.
Yeah, it's been 26 years.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think the actor is D.W. Moffat. I think is the name of the actor.
He's great.
It's just like, wow, what a great dialogue, very subtle performance, very I don't understand it. And then later you find out hey, the way he presented it is not actually what happened, right? It didn't quite play out in the way he presented it. And the movie is all about how we represent things to the public versus how they actually are. And that question is extremely laser focused when it comes to the character of Natalie Portman, Natalie Portman's character, who obviously her job is representing things to the public in a specific way. So I thought there was a lot to get out of it, and ultimately there's some really tragic elements to the movie that we can talk about more later. But
it's deeply disturbing. Well, also it's funny at times. It's so weird. Yeah.
So I got a lot out of it. I really liked it. I thought it was great, and I'd recommend anyone check it out. But there's much more to discuss. So May December is the name of the film. Let's get to spoilers for May December starting right now. So we're in full spoilers now.
Can we talk about Georgie, by the way?
Yeah. Georgie is one of Julianne Moore's characters, Gracie's original children.
Original children. Yeah. Played by Corey Michael Smith. And everything about that character is so fascinating. Like that scene where you're introduced to him while he's singing. I believe that's at the Crab Shack, actually, too. The weird thing about this movie is that it takes place in a lot of places I visited or meant to visit too, so it just feels
so these are actual places in Georgia, and it
Savannah,
and it looks like they shot in Georgia, right?
Savannah plus Tybee Island, which is interesting because it's like a little enclave, and that's where I usually spend summers. But that whole scene is just really fascinating because it's the lawyer talking about the story. It's like, hey, have you met Georgie? And his portrayal of who this kid is, of somebody whose life was essentially ruined by this entire scandal too. I just can't stop thinking about it. I think that's the thing. I'm fascinated by every element of this movie, and the portrayal of Georgie is one of those things too. We only get him in a couple scenes, but man, what an actor.
I mean, I think the core emotional journey of the movie is Melton's character realizing that he has undergone trauma and irreversible damage, basically, right? It's him realizing they have convinced themselves that everything is fine and this is the way it's meant to be, but then as the movie goes on, he's like, wait, actually this is pretty messed up. That's the core journey, and that really worked for me. Jeff Canada, I'm curious, did that work for you at all, or did you not find that sufficiently interesting, or what did you think about?
No, I mean, obviously the metaphor is manifest with the butterfly, right? It's
a little bit on the nose.
But you know what? That scene where he releases the butterfly and the daughter comes in the background, and it's just like that. It's a beautiful thing that is on the nose, but also incredibly beautiful. So it's one of those things. Yeah.
I felt it was on the nose, but
on the nose. Yes.
I mean, it certainly is a harrowing notion, mostly because I feel even, more for his children than him. His children are now in this weird limbo place of, it's an awful situation. And, I was baffled a bit by the moment where, Julianne Moore, confronts Natalie Portman for the last time. And she says something that seemed to me to be perfectly obvious and benign, and is played by Portman like it's this gobsmacking revelation. And that's, my wife and I talked about that for almost an hour, just trying to figure out what was supposed to be happening there. Anyway, but yeah,
let's talk about answer my question, but I want to talk about that scene. But why don't you answer?
No, I think I do think that's the most successful thing in the movie, is seeing him wrestle with this life that he has lived, that he thought was intentional and made with autonomous decisions that he has come subsequently realizing in retrospect maybe weren't autonomous.
That rooftop scene with his son, and his son looks at him when he's like, I've never smoked marijuana before, and the son looks at him and is like, really?
Yeah.
Like you didn't have a childhood because of this whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's finally like weighing on him. Yeah.
I think for me, the line that conveyed that most is when Natalie Portman said, this is what adults do, which it isn't, but also
some adults do. Manipulative people do.
Yeah.
I mean, that my biggest problem, I don't mean to be jumping around thematically. I feel like I am, but I feel like the movie does a bit too. Anyway, my biggest problem with kind of the way you framed it, Devindra, is that I don't think ultimately the movie is saying that Natalie Portman was looking for truth. I think the movie is ultimately saying she was looking to be exploitive just like everybody else. And
that is the truth I'm talking about. That is, she's looking for the thing to exploit for her art. And she's using him in the same way that, Gracie used him. Yeah.
I just don't think that has any relationship with truth. That's her. I mean, that last scene we see her performing in the film is a complete goofball scene.
Okay. Let's take a few things in sequence. Okay.
Yeah.
Like let's take them in sequence. Natalie Portman's character has sex with is it Charlie Melton?
Charles
right?
Melton.
Charles Melton's character, right? And right before that happens, he hands her a note that his wife wrote to him when he was a kid,
when he was a child.
And it's really amazing to like compare that note versus his like pieces Coca-Cola on a hot summer day note. Like one is like a very, written like an adult, and one is like a child's thing. And so that's
by the way, Portman's reading of that is unbelievably good.
I was about to get to that. So the one thing I wanted to note is like you notice like during that entire scene when she's having sex, doing whatever, like she just wants to look at the note. She's just like, I'm trying to get at some kind of emotional truth that I can use for this movie, right? That's what she's trying to do. Then we see her actually delivering the speech. She's just reading the note. It is incredible. It's a tour de force performance. The highlight of the movie, in my opinion, right? It's
agreed 100%.
It is like, wow, this is acting. This is the truth that Natalie Portman was trying to get to. That
a
Natalie
single continuous take of one monologue. It's
straight to camera.
I think she did it like 8 times or something along those lines, and there's nothing in the background. There's no, she's just her. She's lit. She's dressed like Gracie, and that's it. And just straight to camera.
Is she dressed like Gracie?
A little bit, I think. I think she's kind of,
I don't know. My reading of it, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. My reading was that it is not part of the film that she is making.
Correct.
No, that's like a rehearsal to herself
she's just like
in the hotel
practicing
room.
or doing it herself. Yeah,
which juxtaposes, I think, with the farce that they actually are making. Like that's a moment of this actual kind of raw truth that is disconnected from the thing that she ends up actually
making. Isn't that the process of Hollywood, though? Like an actor can go in with the intentions to be as emotionally truthful as they want, but they are not the creator. They're not like they're one piece of this machine. And yes, it does look like a farce. That ending she is trying to do something. They think they can move on. The entire thing looks ridiculous, but
one of the things that's great. One of the things that's great about the movie is how sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Devindra, but one of the things that's great about the movie is like how subtle it is about illustrating who these characters are in the universe of the world. We know that Natalie Portman's character is Juilliard trained, but we kind of get the sense that she's not super happy with her career.
She may not be making the best movies.
She seems to be doing like a Grey's Anatomy show, but for dogs. Like, and I think at one point we also learned that she has a People's Choice Award. So it's like she probably isn't like quite getting the roles that she wants to get. And I think that kind of feeds in that's another layer of like, what is she trying to do here? She's trying to like, she's reaching for something beyond what she's been able to accomplish in the past.
Is she an Oscar chaser looking for that role or something?
And that makes the final scene even more tragic when we kind of see this whole movie, this whole like hour and 40 minutes leading up to now is her trying to like, I got to embed myself with this family to get at this truth. And then it's like, oh, it's schlock.
It's like and we
she's in
see a
Boy.
schlocky version of the story already. We see a made-for-TV schlocky version,
Right,
And this one just looks
it's just like that.
Yeah,
It looks
yeah.
exactly the same.
This one looks
you know?
a little better. The budget looks a little better, but that's it.
It's not as
Yeah.
bad, but yeah, it's like it's also bad. Yeah, Jeff, you disagree?
My reading of it was very different in that I never had any sympathy for Natalie Portman's character at all. She felt like,
Well, I never said I was sympathetic.
I never said
She
yeah.
is
when
a-
you said it
she
was
is a-
tragic, I felt that implied
She
sympathy.
in fact, I think the thesis of the film is that acting is inherently predatory. Like that's what I think the movie has to say about the art form is like that in some way when you are pretending to be someone else, you are extracting something from that person that they cannot get back. That's my take from the. So I was not sympathetic to her at any point. She seems like a horrible human being.
That's why I felt like it was less speaking about something universal about the process and more something specific about this terrible person and these terrible people. I think that's one of the things that I was most frustrated with about the movie is that the circumstances are so specific that I didn't feel like I gained something universal out of it. And you oftentimes you get universality from specificity, but in this case, it was like, this May December relationship is so wildly out of the ordinary that it just didn't feel like it spoke to something that I could relate to or that anybody can really. And I also felt like, Natalie Portman's character was so specifically self-deceiving and narcissistic and, like the entire endeavor was malicious, but not because acting is malicious, not because, not what you said and the way it landed on me was not because it was some universal truth being discovered. It was more that, man, these are awful people bumping into each other.
Right. I feel differently. I'm not saying I agree that acting is inherently malicious, but I think the movie's point of view is that there's something inherently predatory in what Natalie Portman is doing. If Natalie Portman was like a super stand-up human being and didn't have affairs with directors and so on, it would still be bad what she's doing. Like I think that's kind of what my perception of what the movie was trying to say.
Predation is a big part of what this movie is about.
It's like you see somebody who has less status and less power than you. You deceive yourself into thinking that it's fine what you're doing, and then you extract the value from them that you are looking for.
Yeah,
right? Like,
I'm thinking of that
get
scene.
What you want, right?
That scene towards the end of Julianne Moore, where first of all follows the wonderful breakfast scene after the very on the nose butterfly scene. I love that thing. It makes me tear up every time. Like. That scene of the kids together with Charles Melton's character, without the mom in orbit, without her ego kind of sucking up the whole room and them just relating to each other, I thought was incredibly sweet. And it also kind of gets a sense of like what these kids don't have when they're at home and why the son is so eager to leave, why they're all eager to leave, while the daughter in college is like very happy to be away from this toxic relationship. But after that, we see Julianne Moore and Forrest. She has a shotgun. She has 2 dogs. She's out there. We don't know why. She's hunting. She confronts a fox. And I don't know. Like, that's another thing I'm trying to like get a read on. But I almost wonder if like, here I am. I got a freaking shotgun. I've got 2 dogs that can take out this fox at any moment. I have the full like resources of being a predator behind me. I'm going to take out this thing. Why? Like, it is,
and then she decides not to. I believe
she decides not to, and that almost feels like a weird like recognition, or at least like recognition of like what she did, because there is that great scene of them in the bedroom where she's like, "Who was the boss?"
Right, and actually, him. And as you sent this clip, the actual Mary Kay Letourneau was interviewed on Australian television and spoke like. I didn't understand how closely it was based on her.
I didn't know this either.
Until I saw the clip, and it's like, oh, Julianne Moore imitates the way she speaks, and also the phrasing. I have actually a clip from that interview right here.
You were the adult.
You can say that.
I am saying that.
I was by age.
And by maturity.
You maybe.
You were a teacher, Mary. You can't say I was immature.
But you don't know him.
No, but I don't need to know him in this discussion. He's the child. I'm talking about you.
Who was the boss?
What was his name?
Who was the boss?
What?
Who was the boss back then?
There was me pursuing you. But...
Who was the boss back then?
This is ridiculous.
No,
This
who
is
was?
ridiculous.
Who was? Just say.
Just say.
Who was the boss?
All I knew was what I knew back then.
But who was the boss?
He was 13, Mary.
But who was the boss?
This is getting weird.
Who was the boss?
That's
We
a
all
clip.
know the answer is Tony Danza. Just say Tony Danza.
The true boss. The first time I saw this movie, actually the first two times, didn't know that was a real conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
But
now
it's
it
like,
also
yeah,
clicks in.
they almost
Yeah.
lifted dialogue straight from that interview and put it into the movie. Yeah, I mean, Jeff, there's a scene in this movie where Natalie Portman is looking at photos of Asian boys,
Mhm.
and she says to her director,
Audition tapes. Audition tapes.
audition tapes. She's like, not sexy enough.
Not sexy enough.
Now, is that because Natalie Portman specifically is terrible, or is it because there's something inherently dehumanizing about the casting process in general? You can
Well,
decide, but for me,
well,
it's like this is the process of making a movie and being an actor.
It's the absurdity
and-
of telling that story.
Yes.
Right? The absurdity of this 13-year-old has to be sexy
Yeah,
enough
they have to be sexy.
to
This 13-year-old
compel
needs to
a
be sexy.
35-year-old woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeff. What were you going to say?
I mean, I the only thing I would push back on is that I think there is a method of going about researching a role like that that maintains a level of human decency and respect that Natalie Portman's character does not engage in, right? There is the reason why I don't feel like it speaks to a universality of it is that there is a way to go about that isn't as predatory as this, right? That doesn't insert yourself into these people's lives and insinuate yourselves into situations that you don't belong in.
But I'm wondering, Jeff, are you asking for that? I'm wondering, what do you think the specific mode she chose here?
No. I'm saying she's awful and it's awful.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I-
yeah,
sure,
but-
sure.
I'm pushing
Yeah,
it
Jeff is
why.
saying it, therefore it doesn't apply to acting in general.
It's
I
not
guess
necessarily saying
Yeah.
my read was not that it was speaking about a greater truth about how we sort of tell these stories. It felt to me so specific to the way this person is doing
Some
it.
people do that though. This is not like an
Some people
isolated
do.
thing just to that character. It is not uncommon for somebody to go and try to find a true story and try to amp it up. We're in the true crime era where any little story
Right.
is trying to be beefed up into a
Yeah.
podcast series or a Netflix series.
I just
that
felt like
is the thing. Yeah.
Natalie Portman characters' crimes here, such as they are so egregious and so out of the norm to me that it felt like, well, she's terrible, not the process is terrible.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I think Devindra and I don't agree.
That makes sense,
Devindra
but
and I
yeah.
look at Natalie Portman's character and we're like, oh, that's like a fairly
That's
common
a
thing.
lot
that
of
happens.
people.
She
Could also be a reporter
So-
who's trying to get a big story for her
Right.
cover page or something, and that is similarly predatory.
Yeah.
I
mean-
don't think it's uncommon, what she's doing, basically.
There's this book called The Journalist and the Murderer.
Yep.
And it's about how the opening line of The Journalist and the Murderer is any journalist who's like, let me see if I can get this line because I think it's a good one. But it's every journalist who is not too stupid or too full of himself to notice what is going on knows that what he does is morally indefensible.
Yes.
That's the opening line of The Journalist and the Murderer. And it's kind of this indictment of like a journalist who's studying a murder and like that there's something inherently extractive about that relationship. And that's kind of what I felt about May December, regardless of how terrible Natalie Portman was. But it's okay if you don't agree. I want to make sure we get back to this scene though, because I think it is confusing, Jeff. This scene where they meet at the graduation. As the movie goes on, we see kind of Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore. Natalie Portman's character takes on more of the characteristics of Julianne Moore.
She's slowly
starts
transforming into
dressing
her.
like her
Yeah.
and wearing the makeup and the hair like her. And then when they meet at the graduation, it's like, oh wow, they're really similar looking. There is an article in USA Today that tries to address this scene because it is confusing. I agree. I was like, what am I supposed to make of that? I'm going to read from this article. It says, in the film's penultimate scene, the women have one last encounter at Gracie's kid's graduation. Feeling content in her preparation, Elizabeth soon begins to second guess herself when Gracie asks, I wonder if any of this will have really mattered for your movie. Gracie then reveals the lies that her son, Corey Michael Smith, told Elizabeth, meaning that she never actually got the full truth. Julianne Moore said, for me, the most salient point is, do you understand me? Do you know me? I think that for actors and for all of us, you can only get so close to knowing another person. That's what's so wonderful and frustrating about being human. You always want to know more and you're always trying to get in there, but there's always going to be a little piece that's so mysterious that just belongs to that human being, end quote. Then it says, suddenly insecure, Elizabeth scrambles to find something real on the set of her movie, now done up as Gracie with a blonde wig and pink lipstick. Elizabeth asks to shoot yet another take before the screen goes black. End quote. So my interpretation of what this article is saying about that scene is that Natalie Portman's character at that point feels like, I've got this all sewn up. I've already done the scene.
I figured you out.
Yeah, I figured you out. And then Julianne Moore comes in with like dropping a bunch of truth bombs. And then there's a scene where like the camera pulls away from Natalie Portman where she like, I think tries to like imitate like Julianne Moore in that moment. And then the next time we see her, she's on set and whatever truth that she's gotten has been lost, right? She's trying to grasp it, but it's nothing close to what we saw with the previous monologue. So does that kind of make sense, Jeff, as an interpretation for that sequence? You think
It does. Yeah.
But I agree. I was also, the first time I watched it, I was like, what? And then I had to go online and read about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And yeah, I think we are meant to assume at the end, like, I mean, here's the reason why I thought you might like it, Jeff, because haven't you ever, while acting, felt like you achieved something that like was transcendent and then like failed to ever get back to that moment? Like there's one night in the show that was like amazing, and then you failed to ever get back to that moment again. That's what I feel like the ending of this movie captures. You know, like she gets it. She's like, oh, I'm in it. I'm doing the monologue. Everything's amazing. And then never again. Like nothing else that comes after that is even close to that.
Interesting. That's not how that landed on me at all.
Yeah.
I didn't take that. That's an interesting take. I certainly was blown away by that monologue.
Yeah.
And like her leaning back at the end, I think is supposed to be that like,
so good.
I did it. I got there. I found something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. A couple of the things I just want to mention. I like how Julianne Moore did her best Asian mom impression when she like completely destroyed her daughter's self-esteem. Where she's like, she basically said, "Hey, oh, it's so brave of you. That's what you wanted when you tell someone they're brave for wearing an article of clothing." You know. Yeah. There's this entire
brave for showing your arms. Yeah.
Shot in a mirror, which is just such a weird, disorienting way to shoot it. And then she says, "Oh, it's so brave of you not to listen to like modern beauty standards." And you see throughout, she's like always controlling her children's lives in like different ways.
The daughter goes and changes to a shirt with sleeves. Yeah, by the way.
And then cut to next scene, Julianne Moore is wearing a sleeveless dress. It's very. There's like all these subtle ways in which you learn about how Julianne Moore's character is like emotionally manipulating all those around her. Right.
There's Candace Frederick over at HuffPo, I think, wrote a really good piece about just like the idea too that this was a white woman taking advantage of a young Asian boy, but now she is part of a multicultural family, and it's weird how I don't know, the value judgments or the beauty standards of whiteness, I guess, are like a part of her conversation too about not showing your arms because she thinks her daughter's arms are a little too flabby, or giving her other daughter a scale because she's not skinny enough. And it's always making her son eat more because she thinks he's too skinny and she thinks he's not going to look tough in school.
He looks completely fine.
He looks fine. He's fine. The kid is just like, get me the hell out of this house. Love that kid too.
Right.
But like that is another perspective here of like Gracie has no conception that these kids may be living different lives outside of her own cultural understanding too. Like that's another part of this. Yeah.
Another layer. Yeah. So anyway, I think that's most of what I wanted to say on the movie. Jeff, I hope you feel like you got a fair airing of your thoughts as well. And Devindra as well. But I think, I got a lot out of this movie. It's a movie that like stayed with me. I think I had a much different reaction when I finished it. I was like, oh, well, that wasn't a particularly satisfying ending.
It stays with you.
But then it stayed with me. I was like, and like replaying all these scenes in my mind.
Almost every day since we saw this movie, my wife and I have like a conversation about it.
That was like me and my wife with Anatomy of a Fall. We talked about it for days afterwards. I got to give a shout out to Charles Melton's performance at the graduation ceremony. I don't even know if they shot it on the same day and location, because I don't think you ever see him in relation to those characters. But his children are graduating, and you see him, walking along this fence, and he starts breaking down and crying. And it's like, yes, he could be crying because he's happy his kids are graduating, but it's also probably the weight of knowing that he never had a normal childhood, and that it was something that was taken from him. And it's just like,
I can't get that rooftop scene out of my head too. Like his complete breakdown there of, Yes, a very probably accurate interpretation of somebody trying, weed for the first time, but also it is the facade just falls away because he doesn't have the strength to put it together. Like he never had access to this thing, and just his breakdown there is something, that's sticking with me quite a bit.
Also, shout out to the kids who
Kids are so good.
are in this movie. Like both of Julianne Moore's character, Gracie's sets of daughters or children, I should say. It felt like an extremely realistic mix of like how these children would end up. Like her kids with what's his name, Charles Melton's character are like really well adjusted, or like they seem like really normal. You would, if you met them, you wouldn't know that this tabloid national story happened in their past, and that's what kids would do. They would move on. They would like adjust and adapt, and this is normal life. And and they'd have some trauma and unpleasantness, but like it wouldn't present just like if spending 20 minutes with them, and I thought that was a very kind of nice, realistic touch to this. So.
The scene where both families meet at dinner. Oh man,
that's just the only unrealistic thing about this is
I don't know.
Wouldn't you move like far the hell away from any of these people? Like if you were involved in any of that,
that's true. Yeah. But also like she is again, Gracie as a character is fascinating because she has never accepted any guilt of like what she did was wrong too. Like there's a point where she says, I was always naive and maybe that was a good thing for me. And then at the graduation scene, is it she's content or she is like, she is firm in what she believes. She doesn't really have any doubts about her past is the thing. So fascinating as somebody who's resolute and she did nothing wrong. Why, why is this a scandal?
Yeah. At no point does she like have any remorse at all. So,
and nobody in the film calls her out for it too. It's more like subtle things in the neighborhood. Like when they go to the flower arranging scene and Gracie's like, I'm going to show her a good time. The flower lady's like, I bet you will.
I bet you will.
Bet you will.
I bet you will. So anyway. All right. Well, at the end of the day, it's really impressive that Todd Haynes made a movie. Thank you so much for watching this video of the Filmcast. Check out these other videos that we have available, and be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get other videos from us in the future.
You can also go to thefilmcast.com to catch all of our audio podcast versions of all of our episodes.
And support this podcast at patreon.com/filmpodcast, where you can sign up for ad-free episodes and exclusive After Darks.
Thanks so much to everyone who makes the Filmcast possible.